I've seen men die ways I didn't even know was possible. I ain't never saw no roots, no demons, no ghosts, no magic. Just power. And only money can give you that.
You fool. All that war and whatever the hell's he been doing in Chicago. And you back here in front of me. 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and a brain that work. How you know I ain't pray and work every route my grandmama taught me to keep you and that crazy brother of yours safe every day since you been gone?
You're listening to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. This Black Friday, Sound Ideas is offering its biggest savings of the year. Enjoy 50% off all proprietary sound libraries and memberships. Sound Ideas' best deal yet on world-class audio collections. But that's just the beginning. Each week, Sound Ideas will spotlight one of their most popular libraries with an exclusive limited-time discount. Visit sound-ideas.com regularly to discover which library is featured and grab these weekly specials before they're gone. Welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead, and today we are talking about vampires from the Deep South in the massive box office hit by Ryan Coogler, Sinners. This film takes place in 1930s Mississippi, starting off as a pretty straightforward story of the Smokestack twins coming home after being in the big city of Chicago for many years. But after about the 40-minute mark of the film, things start to turn supernatural as a vampire turns up in town. The film is part period drama, part blood-gushing horror, part massive choreographed musical, with some gangster and love story genre thrown in as well. And on top of all that, the film's 2 main characters, the twins, are played by one actor, adding massive complications to the project, I can only assume. We have the audio team that was able to pull off all these different visual ideas and glue them together with sound into a cohesive and wildly entertaining film. First up, we have the film's production sound mixer, Chris Welker. Welcome to Tonebenders, Chris. It's great to meet you.
Good to meet you too, thanks.
Felipe Pacheco was the music editor on Sinners. It's great to meet you, Felipe.
Great to meet you. Happy to be here.
Next up joining me is Sinners' re-recording mixer, handling dialogue and music. We have Brandon Proctor. It's great to see you, Brandon.
Great to see you too, Tim. Thanks for having us.
And the supervising dialogue and ADR editor for Sinners is David Butler. I'm happy to have you here with us today, David. Great to see you.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for inviting us to be here.
And finally, to this massive crew we have with us today, we have the film's supervising sound editor, Burtt. It's wonderful to meet you, Benny.
Great to be here, Tim. Thank you for having us.
I'm really excited to talk to you about this film. It's one of these films that kind of snuck up on me and I think everybody. We knew that this film was coming down the pipe, but it's an original idea. We didn't know what it was about. I had no idea of the musical element of the film when I sat down in my seat at the theater. So first up, let's address the complications maybe with Chris Welker of having Michael B. Jordan play both Smoke and Stack. These characters are not just on screen together, they are interacting with each other. They're handing each other cigarettes. They actually get in a massive fight with each other at one point. How does that complicate things from an audio perspective when you're having the actors being doubled like that?
There's many different ways that you can approach it. It's not the first movie that's done twinning. I've worked on a few movies that did twin work in the past. This was the first time I had ever worked with what was referred to as the techno dolly, which was a repeatable head and crane device. So essentially what they were able to do was to create dynamic moving shots that were repeatable, and they were able to then have Michael B. Jordan interacting with himself while also having the camera do these elaborate, moves. I think initially it wasn't really considered that sound would be an important part of that process. We were in pre-production and doing some tests, and it became pretty obvious to me and my sound team that we could be vital to allowing this illusion that these 2 characters were able to interact with each other. Sometimes that was in sonic interactions where they would be speaking to one another, but the less obvious things were when you would have, for example, a handoff of a cigarette from one brother to the next. because we, had this whole musical element for the show, it was pretty clear that we could utilize some of the playback elements of what we were doing for the musical stuff to also help facilitate that twin work. So utilizing things that actors are very familiar with, such as ADR beeps, we were able to determine which version of, either the smoke or stack performance was the dominant one in the particular scene. And then Michael B. Jordan would play that role. After that, we would take that recording, that video pass from our video assist operator. He would create a GPI trigger that would then trigger the techno dolly to begin the move whenever we would go to do the other pass. We found a device that would allow us to take that same GPI pulse and to trigger our playback system. And so by having the Pro Tools system being in sync with the camera, we were able to then manipulate those recordings to cut out the dialogue where we didn't want it, to add in those ADR beeps where we did want it, and to do things like that. And then as Michael B. Jordan started getting really comfortable with these things that we could do for him, he started having different ideas on what would maybe make his performance feel even better. We initially used a body double to do the first opposing side of the twin work, and we quickly ran into situations where his body double would maybe have different timing than he would have liked. And because we were locked into that timing, you were either waiting for that response from your previous pass, or it kind of like jumped the line. He started asking if there was any way that we could help him to have his exact performance be part of that initial time frame. And so I started looking at some of the things that I'm familiar with. I'm sitting in a room here with an MPC drum machine, and so I basically incorporated Ableton Live into my setup and was able to trigger pre-records of Michael B. Jordan's performances and wait for him to deliver his line and then trigger the response and things like that. So it kind of evolved compared to what we initially thought we were going to get into.
David, as dialogue supervisor, were you having fun cutting out all those ADR beeps?
They're actually really easy to cut out. I'm spending, some time removing it, but it really was like the ideal way to do it because they're short, they're unobtrusive, and using Isotope RX, they're just easy to remove. So it never really bothered me. It wasn't until like another time I heard Chris describing it, I had no idea what these beeps were on the set. That became, that all makes sense now. This is where your line would come in. And then that's when Mike would just deliver his next line.
So something else that I found to be really amazing in this film is the amount of what I assume is loop group. Like there are crowds throughout the entire film. There's a train station scene. There's in town. Obviously, at the juke joint is full of people throughout the whole film. Benny, do you want to talk about how you talked with the director about how to approach all this crowd noise?
I mean, I guess the only times we really discussed loop group outside of the juke was, I think, just in town and in Clarksdale, where we were trying to tell a story, differentiate the two sides of the street. One side being where Bo Chow's shop was, and then the other side of the street where all the white people were, and it's busier over there, and introducing some loop group that told the story that we're still in the segregated South. And as far as the juke goes, there was always a conversation that this was supposed to be, the best night of their life, that it was going to be a great party, and it should just be pumping the whole time. Sorry, Steve's image just popped up. And speaking of partying, but I mean, the whole idea is like we're at this bar or a party and you're just having a hard time hearing over everybody. So it was really kind of a balance of trying to fill the juke, make it feel like it was lively. There's tons of people there, and see how far we could crowd the dialogue or music without really being totally distracting.
You just mentioned Steve Boeddeker just joined us, the re-recording mixer for sound effects and Foley. Steve, now that we have you, do you want to talk about the idea of having a juke joint that is full of noise throughout the entire back half of the film and trying to make that so it doesn't feel like a frying pan to the head of just nonstop noise?
Steve, you still might be on mute, maybe.
Oh.
Or the input's not working.
Okay, well, maybe Brandon can tackle that. How did you handle dialogue when the entire juke joint is live music, live crowd, hooping and hollering? It was a pretty busy place.
Absolutely. I mean, it's constant choices in what's important for the story, whether it's telling the story of how busy it is or how busy it's actually getting, because it is a 24-hour period. So we're getting busier as the night goes on. So we do want to feel that shift, that change, but at the same time, always getting out of the way of either it's the juke music or the dialogue that's happening, or any other music for that matter, or crossing over between the two. Often there's two different music tracks going at the same time with the crowd. And of course, production feat that Chris recorded for us. There's Foley feat that we added. There's all kinds of different, elements that we use to try to keep it sounding natural. Benny, more to talk about as far as the ambience and stuff that you have for that? Because you also did a whole pass, not just the loop group, but you had a whole thing with the effects that you were doing there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak for all of us when we say that we're grateful Chris was our production mixer, because there are so many things that he handled that we were just not even aware of. I don't think I fully appreciated the amount of work that was done on set until, later down the line. But one of the things he and his team did was they'd really spent a lot of time collecting ambiences from outside the juke all around where they were shooting, but they also took the time to do some wild takes. When they had all the background actors in the juke, they did a couple takes of everyone just dancing and moving around. And so it really provided it's not an exciting sound effect, but it's this really great layer that we can kind of use as a foundation for the juke of just people moving around, body movements, cloth rubbing up against each other. And it was a great place to go from there. And then we had Foley record a number of wild takes, people just kind of dancing in rhythm or out of rhythm. And I was able to take those and kind of layer them up quite a bit. So to really kind of just continue to build, like as Brandon said, the idea of the juke's kind of starting out a little bit quieter, but as the night went, it gets busier and busier and more active. So between all the Foley, the movement, and the crowd walla, it just started to build up.
Plus, I love that Chris was so smart to think about when to lay pads down on heavier dialogue scenes to make sure that all the dialogue was captured without too much background noise, and then to actually have it more loose on those movement scenes with all the dancing.
And I also will add the thing that was great about what Chris did is it sort of ties into the loop group, is that he actually has takes in which the background actors are talking, and he's miking them in such a way that we're actually picking up a lot of the things that the background actors are saying, which then becomes the base layer of the scene. So it's not just going to be the principals talking, and now we're going to add in some loop group. We have the principals talking, plus we have some people in the background talking. And at that point, we're adding in the loop group. And we took a similar approach like we did on the movie Saturday Night. We're on the ADR stage. We set up 2 U87 microphones and then have everyone just put on headphones and then just let these long sections of the movie play, like entire songs, and have them to respond to the music. Unfortunately, the songs did change, but I was able to repurpose the sort of response and the energy that they have to the songs that they're listening to, and then recut it so it's hitting certain beats in the music, certain ebbs and flows of the music. So to make sure that the loop group crowd is meeting the music where it should be. In the start of the surreal montage, there's a little bit of actual production voices in there, but then we're adding some loop group and, we're peeling some back. But the key thing is that we have the energy level matching what is being heard on production on 2 separate microphones. So they're sort of distinct. You have some crossover, but it's actually feeling like you're in the space, especially once Brandon's taken the impulse responses that Chris recorded on set to sort of help make it actually feel like this is authentically inside the juke.
Chris or Felipe or both of them recorded the impulse responses on set so that recordings from production, anything we added on top of it, we could mimic the juke interiors to make it sit and feel like they're in the same space, which was really, handy to have.
Felipe, so you were on set recording music as well?
Yes, I was on set throughout the whole shoot. It was quite an experience.
Do you want to talk about a lot of the music, maybe all of the music was recorded, like performances recorded live, correct?
Early on with Ryan wanted authenticity as much as possible, in both like the sound of the space and also like in the instruments and the musicians being actual musicians, everybody actually playing their parts as best they can. So, a big part of that, of me being there, was not only, figuring out the best way to maintain this sound all throughout, production. Chris did an incredible job to record all that. But then after that, there's always the post section. There's the editing. There's the composer wanting to add different things, wanting to change songs. Suddenly one song's not working. So we always wanted to be able to add new elements as necessary or remove them, and the juke still sound like the juke. So, that's where the impulse response idea came back from Chris. So one day I snuck into the juke one night and, recorded a few different spots One big thing that was really helpful for me was I essentially had a Pro Tools session that had every single stem for every single song just laid left to right. And I had a speaker on the juke stage, and then I had a couple microphones laid throughout the stage and throughout the juke in different locations, and just essentially recorded those stems through speakers in the space, all of it. So it was about 6 hours of audio in the end. You know, in the morning when I came back, I just had like all these stems that sounded like they were played live on set.
With having everybody involved from the very beginning of this project and with Ryan's push for authenticity, Felipe Ludwig and Serena Goranson, the executive music producer, we had meetings to try to figure out how we could accomplish these things from the very beginning before we even started shooting and essentially before the music was being composed. So one of the things that we had come up with was, in order to make everything feel seamless, whether it was to allow for the utilization of the pre-records or to have the impulse responses to be able to take post-records and make them fit in that sonic space. We also had Ludwig and his team use the same exact microphones that I recorded with on set. So using DPA 4060 lavalier mics, DPA 4018 shotgun mics, and tracking all those vocals and instruments with those microphones as well when they were in the studio. It gave them the ability in the editing phase, I guess, to be able to make everything sound like it came from one space that was consistent throughout the shoot. And, you know, when Felipe was doing those impulse responses, we loaned him those same microphones that we recorded everything on set with as well. So even the impulse responses have that sonic character of those same microphones. And I think that that's something that allows everything to feel like it's coming from that same space and allows the juke to become a character in this story.
I'm wondering if we can kind of break down... Oh, is Steve talking? We can't hear you, Steve.
Steve, check the input on your Zoom.
We have an audience of one now, or three, I guess.
I'm going to interrupt with a quick pause here to give listeners some behind-the-scenes context. During this whole talk so far, re-recording mixer and sound designer on Sinners, Steve Boeddeker, has been listening in, trying to troubleshoot his computer to find out why it was not letting us hear him. It was actually a really hilarious subplot of the interview as we would watch Steve want to add in his 2 cents, but we just couldn't hear him. But if you stick with us, he does get his rig working, and he does get to catch us up on all his thoughts in a little while. So stay tuned for that. Also of note, music editor Felipe Pacheco was doing this interview while on call during a final mix on his next project. And at this point in the interview, he got called to go make some changes, so he's not a part of the rest of this talk. Okay, with all that information swimming around in your head, we're going to get back to the rest of the interview with the Sinners sound team after this. I want to tell you all about a new microphone that I've been using lately. It's called the Toucan by Soundwich. The Toucan is an omnidirectional ultrasonic microphone that can record up to 100 kilohertz. Designed from the ground up with an extremely unique look, the Toucan wants to make ultrasonic recording available for those on a budget, with an eye-catching price of $185. And since you don't have to break the bank to get a Toucan, simply having one opens up new possibilities for ultrasonic recording adventures and experiments. The Toucan doesn't look like any other microphone you've used before. Tuned for high-frequency capture, each microphone is handmade, 3D printed, soldered, and assembled with care into a clean, minimal body that vaguely resembles its tropical namesake. On the other end from the capsule is an articulating arm, allowing it to reach just about any angle. It also has self-mounting threads, so the Toucan can work with standard mounts and stands. If you plan on using the Toucan outside the studio and out in the world, the articulating arm can be removed so you can fit the mic into a blimp. It is also designed with a special indentation so a furry can be slipped into place, making the Toucan a true exterior ultrasonic microphone. Whether you are capturing animal calls in the wild or recording strange sounds in your studio to bend and stretch beyond recognition, the Toucan is ready to deliver. Soundwich also has some really fun field recording inspired hoodies and t-shirts that are definitely worth checking out. This is the perfect time to buy because for Black Friday, Soundwich is offering 15% off everything, starting now and running until November 30th, 2025, only while supplies last. So head over to soundwichartist.com or click on the link in this episode's description in your podcast app to learn more and order a toucan for yourself. I'm wondering if we can maybe break down a specific scene in the film. As the juke gets to its kind of height of the night, there's a scene where we kind of go through everybody's culture and we go through time. The music becomes modern and it's also old. We hear foot stomping and it's right before the vampires kind of approach the door. And it's this amazing sonic explosion of sound. Maybe we could talk about going through that. Benny, do you want to talk about the intent of that scene from a sound perspective?
Sure. You were saying earlier the movie kind of caught you off guard, or you just didn't know what to expect, and it was kind of a bit of a surprise. I think we all kind of felt that way. The first time I saw it and read it, it just was a lot to digest. And this scene, I remember reading about it and just kind of not being sure what it was on paper. And then the first time I saw it, all I could say was, I remember telling Steve, it's a lot to digest, but I don't know what to think, but I loved it. It's just such a cool scene. One of the challenges we faced was a lot of people that were giving feedback, I think, felt the same way. They loved it, but they weren't quite sure if it took them out of the movie because it was so different. And so there was a lot of conversations as how do we get it so that it feels like we're in Sammy's mind and that all these ghosts aren't really all there all of a sudden. And so at least from an effects standpoint, we started pulling back some of the layers to just kind of let the music live and get out of the literal world, but to losing Foley, losing some of the effects and make it feel less grounded in reality. And one of the great things about this scene is that because it's a long single shot, is that it gives us the opportunity to kind of really play with sound to allow it to move around the room. It's just a fun experience, especially in Atmos or IMAX, where you just feel it kind of just all the way around, and it's just unique in itself.
Yeah, there's not a lot of opportunities in other films where you can pan all the layers of the music as much as you want and get away with it and actually have it work in a scene. And of course, that single perspective, even though it might be 3 cuts in there, I'm not sure, but that single perspective allows you to do that and to be able to kind of keep track of where Sammy is the whole time. And Ryan even took me through the whole scene. And basically, I panned Sammy with Ryan. So he was constantly telling me and blocking where the camera was with Sammy the whole time because you don't see him the whole time. And so we stay true to where Sammy really was on set as well, because at times you're like, wait, is he to the left? Is he to the right? And just to be able to stick a solo acoustic guitar and actually pan it around the room is pretty amazing. And just to constantly keep track of are we balanced to the room? Is there too much left, too much right? Can we actually get away with that? Constantly trying to keep it in check without also taking the viewer out of it. It's fun, but is it fun at the sake of the film? And Ryan's always telling us to just push it, just to continue to go further, go as far as we possibly can. We are constantly doing that on this film all over the place, actually. What can we get away with and still make it cinematic and part of the film?
Yeah, I was going to say that touching upon what Brandon was saying there is that Ryan sort of encouraged everyone to take it up to the breaking point, even go past the breaking point. And that's where we know where the limit is. So that whole aspect of Brandon's mix of the music, it started off relatively straightforward, like a traditional sense of all the music's going to mostly be coming from the front of the theater. So let's really start to shift it around the room. And it's like a dramatic shift around the room. Your first initial instinct might be that's just crazy talk, but it just becomes, no, it actually, what made it so great is that it became completely immersive at that point. I have to give credit to Ryan, and this was sort of said during the edit of the movie. He said they're taking some big swings. And this is a moment sonically that it's a big swing. The way Brandon executed it, it was just so perfect. It's one of the 2 moments in the movie that sonically we just love how it worked.
I think it also helps that we panned everything and went that way with it. If it was just played a little more traditional musically, it almost sticks out more, I feel like, as a scene. It also gives Ryan the opportunity to almost do whatever he wants in the rest of the film. If he can get away with this scene, after that, you can have vampires killing, whatever. You can do whatever you want.
I think there were even people advocating to have him removed.
There were.
There were people that saying it took me so far out of the movie that I don't think it should be there.
Yeah.
And it's a crazy thought, especially now where we are here. It's just I can't imagine it not being in the movie.
I think once we got all the glue of the film together and the sequence of the edit, at that point, people finally came on board.
It's wonderful because, like, a film of this size, this budget, it's shot on IMAX, to take a risk like that and let the director kind of actually let his voice shine through. I'm not surprised to hear that some people wanted it taken out, because it is, as you said, a big swing, but it brought a giant smile to my face when I saw it. And you're right. I think David said for half a second, you're like, what's going on? And then you just buy into it and you're with it. It's movie magic. But speaking of the idea of how big this movie is and shot on IMAX cameras, Chris, do you want to talk about how that affected the sound on set?
Yeah, initially going into meetings with Ryan to talk about, I had heard that this thing was going to be shot on IMAX film cameras. I saw years ago, before this, some behind the scenes footage from the movie Nope. And I remember being completely shocked by the idea that the camera was, as noisy as it was. I wanted to know, where is this thing? And I want to hear it. They were doing camera tests, and I was able to get the camera team to roll the camera for me. And it was just like, okay, so now that I know what I'm up against, how are we going to do this? Because again, the authenticity keeps coming up. That was like a big factor for Ryan. So from a sound perspective, like this could be a major hurdle. We had some conversations early on where he kind of settled my concerns by telling me that he had meetings with Christopher Nolan where they talked about the use of these cameras in his movies. And whenever they were using that particular camera body, they typically reserved it for wide shots. And then when you go in for a tight shot and you're really doing your coverage, then you would switch to the Panavision System 65 camera, which still is a large format film camera, but it's a lot quieter. And you can actually record dialogue you're not really challenged to the same degree. And so I'm thinking, well, what do we do when we're rolling that camera? This is all going to be ADR'd. And he said Christopher Nolan told him that they would do a sound-only recording. So essentially you would roll the camera, get your actors' performances the way that you like, and then once you're ready to move on, just like the way that they do commonly with VFX passes, they'll do their HDR photos on set. They do the gray balls and the chrome balls, and so that they have all these elements that they can use. Well, we started having our sound-only pass, and I tried to lobby to actually do the sound-only pass before the VFX elements, because the goal was to have the actors stay as locked in on those performances. It really took Ryan pushing the actors to understand that this could theoretically be the sound performance that would be used, really bringing that same level of performance in those sound-only recordings. And then also thinking, with my editor hat, I'm thinking, well, how do I get them to separate these performances into layers that won't overlap each other? So, if they're walking in and grabbing a doorknob and closing a door, I don't want them to do that while they're saying their lines. I want them to do this, the dialogue performance, and then maybe do on-set Foley pass, essentially. I started finding that we were using this camera a lot more than we initially talked about, and that we had picture editors on set essentially cutting together these sound-only passes and breaking things down into, syllables and shifting them to match the mouth movements of the visual performance. And I ran over to the tent after every single time just to see how they were doing with it and wanting to see the outcome of it. I just couldn't believe that this would work. After seeing a couple of takes of it, it was like, well, okay, that's passable. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, once it gets into the hands of somebody like David, he's going to be focused on the sound of this performance much more than the picture editor.
I would say pretty much every line of dialogue in this movie has been rendered through noise reduction. Even the stuff shot on the Panavision, it's because of maybe a distant generator, maybe because of the bugs, maybe because of any number of elements, even the movement inside the juke. Chris went to great lengths in sections of the movie to put carpeting down on that wood floor. There's still a lot of people in leather-soled shoes moving around. But at the end, 95% of that movie has been denoised because it needed to be. Even the sound-only takes, it might be a little bit noisy because of the bugs. There's only a handful of instances where the noise just was too severe, like the reveal of Remick as the vampire shot in the nursery. I think one is a sound-only take and one is an ADR take because Jack said something different in the sync than he did in the sound-only take, so we had to correct that with ADR. And then I think some of the lines at the baptism scene at the end of the movie, we had all ADR, and then Brandon starts putting things back in. We have the ADR as a precaution, but it's not what we want to use, of course. And Brandon is on stage with adding the music, adding everything that Steve and Benny have brought to the party. And like, let's start seeing what we can put back in. And there's only a couple words that I think that we ended up using ADR for.
Yeah, we just, for the most part, try to steal the words we needed, especially some of that's prosthetic stuff, or maybe it's, accent. Yeah, I even fought for a couple of the ones where it was production, but it was prosthetic. And I was like, well, I mean, I hear that it's there, but I like the performance better.
A vampire with fangs would kind of sound like that anyway.
Yeah, right.
They're getting in the way.
Kind of the same thing, right? Like that's what things do.
Have you been using Subquake by the Cargo Cult? I've had my mind blown by this plugin. I've been able to get the low end to cut through in my mixes in ways I was never able to achieve before. Over the years, I've used a bunch of different low-frequency generator plugins, but Subquake is an entirely different beast. This is not a music plugin that we all have to adapt for our purposes. Subquake was designed for post-production by people working in film and series to solve the problems that other plugins were never built to handle. Subquake pushes your sub sounds forward, making them feel huge, but it keeps everything in spec with its own built-in filters and limiters, all within this single plugin. It is also repeatable and reliable, meaning your rumble won't change each time you play back the scene. You can even punch in on a rumble tail with no snaps or clicks. Gunshots are suddenly tight and they punch. Explosions shake the room, and rumbles have ridiculously long tails. The Cargo Cult recently released version 1.1 of Subquake, which is a free update for existing users. It has a new UI option featuring a more simplistic interface with recognizable knobs to quickly navigate to what you need to get to. Or you can still dig in deep with the full graphical UI showing you every detail of what is happening. It also comes with a treasure trove of presets, including a new category specifically for post mixers to get you where you want to go in short order. Don't fall into the trap of delivering boring ho-hum sub. Add character and shape to your mixes by having more impact from less signal. Get Subquake and shake the plaster right off the walls. Head to thecargocult.nz to learn more. One of my favorite flavor of sounds in the film was the vehicles. Benny, do you want to talk about sourcing out vehicles from the 30s and making them sound cool? The one thing that I really loved is there's a couple of scenes where just long shots of the cars driving at a fixed speed in a straight line for a long time. And those sounds for engines can often just become white noise. But it seemed like these cars had the sounds of the actual car shaking around that made it an interesting sound for those long period of times.
Yeah, it's I think they're like a 1927 Dodge Brothers convertible and a 28 Dodge truck. It's funny because I remember this conversation we had on the stage was there are a couple of driving scenes, and there's one in particular where Sammy's talking about how sweet the car is, and Stack's talking about how fast it is, and they're describing it as if it's like a hot rod, but here we are, like it sounds like a lawnmower, and it's the temptation to beef it up a little bit was certainly there, but we didn't. But yeah, the driving scenes, the challenge there was to make it feel like they didn't just drone on. Again, using the production recordings, they tried to clean up a lot of dialogue. Some of our job was to bring some of the dirt and grit back in. So like tires on gravel, get the wind and stuff kind of blowing through the cabin, through the air and around the suits, and add some suspension, ronks, and creaks.
Well, within that driving scene, one of them, when Slim is telling the story of the prisoners that they drove by, we go into hearing the sounds of the story he's telling, even though we don't see it. And to put this delicately, sometimes when that technique is used, it can become very cheesy. But it works in this film. It really works. It's an excellent added layer. And I just wanted to maybe talk about that, how you approach it, and if you were also worried about it not working. I would say Steve, but we can't hear you, Steve.
Steve's got the greatest answer in the world prepared, but is unable to share
and he's
it.
saying it right now.
Yeah. And this was something, if I'm honest, we kind of explored later in the game. It wasn't something that we had forever. I mean, this is one of the fun things about working with Ryan is that he loves to explore ideas. And sometimes he gets an idea late and we try it. I think this one we kind of toyed with like in the day or two leading up to the studio playback. He really wanted to help tell the story of him and his buddy Rice playing it for a bunch of white folks in their parties and then also getting beaten up and lynched. And so the conversation became, well, how can we do that without stepping on the performance? It was a combination of David cutting some loop group, finding the right holes to add the lines. And then my job was to I took what David had done with the lines, is use some sound effects to assist in that storytelling. We kind of went back and forth a little bit. I think we played it for the studio, and initially we had played it with a bunch of reverb and kind of made it more dreamy. It ended up being a bit distracting. So we kind of tabled the idea, but we kept going back and forth.
Initially we did. We was like, well, it's a kind of a dream, so let's do it in all speakers and kind of make it, dreamy and different from their dialogue and everything. And it was distracting. Maybe it was cheesy, actually. Maybe not cheesy, but it did distract from the story and the importance of the story. We were having almost trouble with it in a sense. And then finally we're like, why don't we just make it dry, mono, make it behind the story? I think there is like a bit of verb on it, but it's more of like, situational verb for like the period and where they're located. But it's more of a like, just to make sure we're behind Delroy's story and make sure that is the most important thing that people are listening to. Because when it was all speakers or reverb or anything, you started listening to those sounds more than the story. Just playing it very simple and delicate in the center speaker, which seems so easy to say now. Those guys edited just the perfect amount of what we heard with the loop group and music.
I was going to say, the other thing we had to work at a play is Felipe with the music, because we have both music playing for the period of Young Rice and Young Slim, but we also have the music being played at the score at the same time. So there was the balance of trying to make it seem like it wasn't confused. Like, is that music on the radio in the car?
Yeah, that was, we didn't want to make it sound like there was score coming in. It was actually their music at the time.
If you haven't noticed, one of the great things about working with Ryan is that he's forward-thinking and that he's thinking about sound and music really early in the process. So it's like, obviously he's got Ludwig and they're discussing their ideas. But, our first involvement was just a call from Zinzi saying, hey, we're going to have these pre-production meetings. Can you guys, the sound team, hop in so we can be a part of it and help present some ideas? And so they were just open to having, what are things that we should be doing to get the best recordings possible? And what are some things that we're not thinking of that maybe we should be thinking of, so that we can really kind of make sure that what we're getting is what we can use all the way through to the end. And we're not just making a music video and throwing the music on top. They brought Felipe out for the entire production, which is unusual. And then he was this conduit from production all the way through post. And he and Chris, they knew where all the bodies were buried. So if anytime there was a big change in the picture cut that impacted music, they were able to figure out solutions to keep what we had without having to re-record anything else.
And on set, he's cutting takes together for dailies so they can literally start seeing what they might need to capture more of or what's working for them. So he literally was editing that music from day one.
Yeah, I remember this is the first time I ever had the opportunity to work with somebody that's a music editor on set. Typically, we get recordings or stems sent to us, and then we're kind of left to kind of figure it out on our own. And to have somebody that essentially was there to make sure that what we were recording was going to be able to be used in the end. It was like a great opportunity for me, because I felt like I had some way to maybe help shape the sound of this music. When we were thinking about mic placements and how to do this, I've worked on projects that were large scale musicals before, but we typically had the benefit of having microphones, whether modern or period, appropriate microphones in front of the performers to help capture those performances, or amplified instruments. And, this is a project that's set in the 30s, and it's about acoustic performances, vocals, acoustic guitars, and they used period appropriate instruments too that are delicate. And we're putting them in these environmental conditions where you're in 100-degree heat, you have a lot of humidity. How do we accomplish making these recordings actually usable when you can't stick a microphone in the shot right in front of the instrument or the vocalist? And so kind of coming up with ways to hide microphones, whether it be having our costume department sewing microphones into the shirt cuff of the actor so that it's right next to the guitar tone hole, so that when you're doing a wide shot and then you go into a tight shot, you have consistency in the guitar performances, because we're not just recording vocals, we're recording instruments. We had situations where in the train station location, there's a performance that's done by Miles, who plays Sammy, and Delroy, who plays Delta Slim. And Miles is an actual musician. He's a singer. He was discovered, I guess, through playing with the group Her as a backup singer. But he's an accomplished musician and phenomenal vocalist. But Delroy, he's not a musician in that same sense. Ludwig brought in a blues legend harmonica player, Bobby Rush, for that train station location. And in the efforts of making that not be a playback scenario because of Delroy's not being able to play the harmonica, we literally put him in the shot and surrounded him by background actors. And we recorded him playing the harmonica along with Miles. And Miles is playing the guitar and singing, and Delroy's essentially looking at this living legend 10 feet away from him, and he's mimicking him in the moment while cameras are rolling. And so these are the kinds of things, the efforts that we went through on this show to make these performances not be playback, when it wasn't necessary. The song Traveling was a really interesting one for me. This young man playing an acoustic blues guitar. It's got the resonator, no amplification, and he's going to be driving in a car and he's going to be singing. And I'm guessing they're not going to be driving on smooth roads too, being that it's the 1930s. So yeah, it's going to be on gravel roads. We did some pre-shoot tests to see how we could accomplish that. We did wet downs on the roads to try to help with some of the gravel noise so that it wasn't kicking up rocks underneath, or it was at least minimizing the effects. We had the members of his team, Noah Gorlick was there with us, and his job was solely just to keep those guitars in tune, talking about 100-degree weather, and when you think about what goes into making a movie, you think about the lighting, you think about the cameras, you think about the hair, makeup, and wardrobe. And when it comes to the sound department on set, I think a lot of times we're kind of like on our own little island, and people don't really understand all the things of that go into what we do. And when you throw in music on top of that, I think it takes a certain kind of understanding of what it is to be a musician and what all goes into that. There's certain things that you have to warm up in order to be ready to perform, and you have to make sure your instruments are tuned. And there were a few times where we had to say we're not ready to roll yet, because he has to go back out and tune the guitar again because he thought he had it in tune, but it just popped out of tune. And so it's like prioritizing that performance and saying, because this is a priority for Ryan, we have to take this extra time and these efforts in order to make sure that everything is right, because if it's not, then that performance is wasted.
But I think also, to Felipe's credit too, some of the stuff did end up getting compiled from a couple different takes, and so you're having to take in the engine wherever it's idling or whatever cadence it's at. Each take sounds slightly different, and to make them all sound seamless and from the same take was no easy task. But he did a great job.
Let's do a mic check with Steve. Steve, can we hear you now?
Oh God, do we have sound?
Oh my gosh! I heard the juice.
Oh,
glug, 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 glug.
You know what it was? No, I had two browsers running, and they were fighting with each other. That's all it was.
You got to stop fighting.
So I know.
Well, now that we've got Steve, it was great talking to you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Are you going to shut me down right now?
Just joking.
All right, I just have two things to say, but it's going to be probably more like 5.
Go for it, please.
Chris. It was like collaboration for days, and not because we were not good at our jobs, but because we were good at our jobs, and we were good at respecting each other and knowing that really well recorded production dialogue and on-set music is going to make the mix go so smoothly.
To Steve's point, I think one of the themes we keep coming back to anytime we talk about this is just the collaborative effort amongst all the departments. Steve, Brandon, and I have been working together for a while. We've worked on another show with Felipe, but this is my first time with David and Chris. We all get along really great, which is nice. But there was just so much back and forth, whether it was Chris and Felipe sending stuff from production over to David to help clean up, and then back over to the music department. And then every department had to be on top of their game to make it all work. And I've never interacted with a production mixer as much as I have as on this show. And it's, I think our work kind of speaks for itself.
No, it's very true. Collaboration and mad respect, because everybody is the best at what they do. And so it's like, you gotta step back and let the solo guitar player play.
Because there was so much dialogue and music being set back and forth between the departments, even the Pro Tools sessions had similar like plugins and denoisers were in the music machine. So there can be consistency between the two machines themselves. You know, Felipe would send music stuff to David and he might clean it up just the same way, the same process he's going through on the dialogue he might do to the music and then send back to Felipe. So there's just, there was such a cohesiveness between departments for that reason.
Chris's forethought of collaboration, the one thing I'll say, you know, obviously it's the camera and the environment was extremely noisy, but give me really good recordings. And it's like the background noise is bad. I'll worry about that, but just make sure that the signal is just in a place where I can salvage that. And then also the great thing, you know, is obviously it's a big cast, a lot of lobs going. But at no point, I think Chris is like shutting off a lob on anyone, even if they're not in the shot. If they're like off screen just talking, they're going. And then suddenly I could find little gems like after the vampires, the drifters, as we call them at that point, after doing Pick, Poor, Robin, Clean, and they're walking away from the juke, that Joan is sort of singing this little ditty right there. And that was like not in the mix track because she wasn't really talking at that moment. But the fact that it's on her lob, suddenly it's like you see her sort of bopping as she's walking away. And it was like, you know, I'm going through all the mics and it's like, we are totally adding that to the movie because she is performing in that moment. And it just becomes like this tiny, like little 2-second bit that adds so much flavor to that scene. And the fact that at no point Chris is like potting everyone down. It's like, give me as many things as possible to play with so that when we need to, like all the laughter that's off screen from the principals, it's like, let it live somewhere. So in the moments that it happens, we can add this laughter. We can add these little bits that aren't lines of dialogue, but it's these very real moments of the characters in that moment.
So can we talk about the scream?
We can.
Go for it.
Yeah, everyone's laughing because we got shut down. The post supervisor was like, you guys are getting...
It was late. It was late on a Saturday night.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Which scream is this?
This is the moment that Joan comes in and it's the Remick reveal and she lets out a big scream after, you know, her husband is like now getting up off the floor. Remick's like, oh, no, it's all right. It's all right. Don't cry now. You know, it's he's all better now. And then she lets out this big scream. And it was long, but it was Ludwig's idea of like, let's make it longer. She's a musician herself. She's a singer. So she maintained perfect pitch throughout that entire scream. So then we could sort of take that section and reverse it and then add on to it again and eventually turn it into like this 10, 14 second long scream.
Hey, baby. Don't cry.
And it was like, again, who can actually scream that long? It's an insane idea. And it was an idea born after, you know, the grind of the entire mix. It's the final weekend. It's approaching midnight on Saturday night where people are just kind of getting punchy. Like Ryan is dancing a jig on stage. Everyone's just like, you know, a little bit loopy.
Yeah.
But it was like, here's this batshit idea. Let's try it. And then we tried it. And it was like, of course it worked.
I think Zinzi even was like, can we go longer? Can we go?
Well, it was Zinzi's idea. I was afraid that Ludwig was going to get pissed off because it was going to get into the score.
Oh, is that it?
And then he stepped up and said, let's make it longer.
And at one point we made it almost too long because we wanted to kind of end with the music.
In the juke, yeah.
Ryan said the other day, he thought that we went too far. And then the next day when he heard it, he was just like,
yeah.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me today. We went a little long. I'm glad that you could all do that. I appreciate it. As I said in the intro, this movie really surprised me. The musical elements I did not know were going to be a part of it. And that one amazing scene that we broke down made me so happy. Everything about this movie was a real treat for me. So thanks for all the hard work that you all did to make it possible. I know I'm not alone saying that it was a really amazing theatrical experience.
Well, thank you for inviting us to do this. So we always enjoy talking Sinners.
Yeah, thanks.
Big thanks to the sound team that joined me for this talk from Sinners. I'm so glad Steve Boeddeker finally got to get on the line and give us his point of view. He is a trooper for not just bailing on the whole thing about 35 minutes earlier. This episode was edited by Anita Jung. Stay tuned for some amazing episodes coming up in the next few weeks. I love talking sound with you all, so let's do it again. Listeners in Europe, I will be at the Sonic Days conference later this month, where there will be a Tonebenders Denmark sound design meetup on Tuesday, November 18th. Come on out if you can. Go to sonicdays.com to learn more. This Black Friday, Sound Ideas is offering its biggest savings of the year. Enjoy 50% off all proprietary sound libraries and memberships. Sound Ideas' best deal yet on world-class audio collections. But that's just the beginning. Each week, Sound Ideas will spotlight one of their most popular libraries with an exclusive limited-time discount. Visit sound-ideas.com regularly to discover which library is featured and grab these weekly specials before they're gone. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues. Or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.